Welcome. I'm Dr. Brian Kloppenborg. I'm the Executive Director of the AAVSO, and I'll introduce the other members that are here as panelists today. I'd like to thank you for joining our first ever, Meet the Candidates webinar. Joyce Guzik, who is the chair of the nominating committee, thought this would be a good opportunity for folks to learn a little bit more about the candidates, and it's something that we haven't tried before, so we figured we'd give it a go. Before we get started today, I have a couple of different just kind of like housekeeping items up front, and as well as a little bit of information about the board and how the nomination process works. And so, of course, I have some slides to go along with it. The first of which is that today we're using Zoom in webinar mode. And so unlike normal Zoom meetings, this provides a couple of additional buttons that you may not be accustomed to or you may not have seen before. So at the bottom of the screen, there is a button down there that allows you to introduce yourself with the chat. People you can talk with not only the hosts and the other panelists, but also each other within the chat. If you have any questions that you'd like to direct towards the panelists, we ask that you use the Q&A box that's down at the bottom as well. Just type in your question there and we'll be able to see it. And Joyce and I will serve as moderators later on in this presentation to relay your questions over to the candidates. And as I just saw, somebody had just enabled the closed captioning feature. So if you need to, go ahead and turn on the closed captioning feature. And just please note that the language that you should select for closed captioning is English. It's the language being spoken as opposed to the language that you speak yourselves. So our agenda for today's webinar basically consists of these 5 different sections. We'll have kind of introductory comments, which is what I'm presenting tonight right now, and that'll take about 10 minutes. Each one of the candidates will be given 5 minutes to offer a opening statement, followed by some questions from Joyce, who's the nominating committee chair, for 25 minutes. And she has 2 questions that she'll be directing to each one of the candidates. Then we have left open 25 minutes at the end of the session for questions from the audience. And again, if you have any of those questions as we go along, feel free to type it into the Q&A box, and Joyce and I will moderate those things. And then finally, we'll have a couple wrap-up slides from me just at the very end, reminding you about the election process and just a couple of housekeeping items about where you can go to find your ballots. So the first thing I'd like to talk about today is just the purpose and composition of the AAVSO board. And I apologize in advance about this being, just a wall of text here, but it kind of explains the board all in one single place. So on the upper left-hand side, the purpose of the board is really to establish vision, put together our missions and our values, and sets strategy and policies. They also serve as an entity that ensures that the AAVSO, as a legal business, it actually complies with all of the applicable regulations as well as laws. Now, the AAVSO, of course, is incorporated in the state of Massachusetts and is a 501c3 nonprofit. We got that, I think, in 1957, which was when the nonprofit law was created. And so we've been around for quite a while. But we also have now, we are doing business in the form of having employees in other states as well. We now have somebody in Colorado, that would be myself. We also have 1 employee down in the state of Oklahoma and yet another employee in the state of Texas. And so taking a look at the applicable laws, as it pertains to employees is one of the duties that the board does. The board also has 1 employee, and that's the executive director. And so they serve directly as my managers by providing, specific guidance as to the things that I'm supposed to do, mostly through strategies and policies. Board members' typical activities. We have 4 large quarterly meetings, which last somewhere between 2 to 3 hours. Then we have 8 additional small monthly meetings that are typically about an hour in duration. In addition to that, the board members serve on a variety of different committees. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about what committees exist, you can go to the URL down below and find out what else we have. And one thing I would like to note is that, like many nonprofits, the board members of the AAVSO are unpaid volunteers. And so we're incredibly grateful for them for the time that they put in. And, having been a board member on a couple other organizations in the past, sometimes it's relatively minimal in terms of the work that you need to do, and other times it really kind of stacks up. And so we're incredibly grateful for anybody who serves on the board. Now, in terms of what the board is actually composed of, on the right-hand side here, I'm pulling these items out of our bylaws as well as a couple other locations. So the board basically consists of officers, directors, a past president, and a past executive director. So the officers are appointed by the board annually, usually at our November board meeting that occurs immediately before the AAVSO's annual meeting. We have a president and a vice president. Those individuals can serve a maximum of 2 years in a given term in a given office, and then they rotate off. We have a secretary that can serve a maximum of 1 5-year term, and then a treasurer that can serve a maximum of 10 1-year terms. And I apologize, I misspoke on the secretary. They're also it's 5 1-year terms, not 1 5-year term. And then there's also the executive director, which serves as an officer of the AAVSO for as long as their contract is valid. We also have a variety of directors. These are all individuals who are elected by the members. They consist of 9 individuals, and they have a maximum of 2 3-year-long terms. And then after their term expires, they can run again for the board if they choose to after a 2-year cooling off period. And every single year we elect 3 new members to the board, and that's the candidates here today are going to be some of those 3 members that will be elected. The past AAVSO president serves a 1-year term if they choose to, and they just serve basically as advisor to the new incoming president. That helps ensure a little bit of continuity in terms of directional organization and allows for a nice, smooth handoff as well. And then the past executive director can be invited to serve a 1-year term on the board at the board's discretion. All right. Here's our current list of board of directors. So on the left-hand side are the officers. They consist of the current president, David Cowell, me as the executive director, Richard Berry and Sarah Ostrin-Willis as the first and second vice president, and then Chris Larson and Robert Stevens as the secretary and treasurer, respectively. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the current directors of the board. We have the class of 2023 consisting of Bob, Ken, and Antonella, class of 2024, which are Martina, Dennis, and Thomas, and then the class of 2025, which is Peter, Pat, and Arnie. Now, the individuals here that have blue boxes circled around them are folks whose terms are expiring at the end of this year. So David Cowell, the president, will rotate off, and then at the November board meeting, a new president, first and second vice president will be appointed by the board. And then we'll have a new incoming class of 2026 as board members when Bob, Ken, and Antonella roll off the board at the end of this year. I want to talk a little bit about the voting process that exists here and how the nomination process works as well. The board, actually our bylaws require that the AAVSO has precisely 1 committee is required, and that is the nominating committee. And this is a small committee that operates independently from both the board and the executive director to provide the members with an impartial third party that handles the nomination process. The way this works is that the board president appoints 3 existing AAVSO members to serve as the nominating committee. And the one rule that exists around that is that current board members can't serve on the nominating committee. And it's important to note that, of course, this committee is intentionally operating independently from the board and the executive director. That although they can request resources from us as needed, by and large, they go out and they find individuals that they think would be good to serve on the AAVSO board and bring them in. The committee is required to recommend somewhere between 5 and 6 candidates to the board. That list of candidates is presented to the board and approved just as part of a procedural process. The way that the election works is that the 3 candidates with the most votes are appointed to the board. And if there is a tie for third place, the president is allowed to break that tie pursuant to our bylaws. This committee, not only do they accept recommendations and self-nominations from members, but they also actively reach out into the broader community within astronomy and other fields as well, and they attempt to find people that they believe would serve as good board members for the AAVSO. Now, in terms of your voting rights as a member of the AAVSO, each member and honorary member of the AAVSO is entitled to 1 vote. And when you actually do go through the voting process, which is this year being hosted on Big Pulse, which is a system we've used in previous years, you may vote for up to 3 candidates. Now, one procedural rule that I'd like to point out that is that the being a member or not being a member is determined on the date and time at which we disperse the ballots. And so if you didn't receive a ballot, you just have to see whether or not you were a member on September 1st when we sent out the ballots. And if you didn't receive one and you think that you should have, please send an email to avso@avso.org and we'll investigate whether or not you were indeed a member and if something a mistake was made. But thus far, we're pretty confident that everybody that received a ballot should have received one via email from Big Polls. And the question is, well, how do you actually vote? And so we've done our voting for the last several years through a third-party service called Big Pulse. You should have received an email that indicated that you were given a unique URL to actually go through and do with the voting process. So you can vote electronically using that link, or if you would prefer to, you can also vote in person at the annual meeting. But in both cases, it's important to note that the ballots close at 9 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time on Sunday, November 5th, which is during the member meeting portion of the AAVSO's annual meeting. So please be sure to get your ballots in advance. So this year's candidates are shown here on this slide. We have Walt Cooney, Matt Craig, Eric Hintz, Munkacsy, and Diogo Teixeira, and they will all be presenting here in just a couple of moments. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about the individual candidates, their statements are actually linked to in the URL that's listed at the bottom of the screen. And then in terms of the people that are here serving as the moderators today, Dr. Joyce Guzik, who is a former AAVSO board member from 2015 to 2022, she volunteered to serve as our nominating committee chair. And then I will also be serving as a moderator of this session as well. And so with that, that's actually everything that I have to present today. So I'll go ahead and stop screen sharing, and I will turn the floor over to Joyce.
Hey, thank you, Brian. That was a really nice introduction. We do have in the Q&A, I have a question from Richard Post, and he reminds us that the board covers not just astronomy skills, many skills are needed on the board: fundraising, management experience, etc. So we're really grateful for all the different diverse skills you bring to this to this position. So okay, so the first thing on the agenda is to have give each of you 5 minutes to give a little biography and why you are interested or willing to run for the AAVSO board. And I will keep a timer here just in case we're running long, and give you a reminder if you're over your 5 minutes. So, and I'm going to try to randomize this a little bit. So I think we'll start with Eric. Is that okay, Eric? All right, go for it.
Okay, I'm Eric Hintz. I am from currently the associate chair at Brigham Young University in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. I'm over the undergraduate, the student side of things. So student complaints and things come to me. It also deals quite a bit with the budget of the department. So having to deal with a rather large department here, 32 faculty, 300 and some majors, a lot to deal with. My background in variable stars actually goes back to my undergraduate when I was in Northeastern Ohio, where I'm from, Case Western Reserve University. I did a senior thesis in the days when senior thesis really didn't exist very much, and had the chance to work on some data that a graduate student didn't need. And that set me down the road to chasing very short period pulsating variable stars in the case of Delta Scutis. My current work goes all the way up the instability strip and in other kinds of variables, but mostly short period pulsators. And I've had the chance to be the section leader for the short period pulsators at the AAVSO for a number of years now, trying to promote that side of things. They're the most exciting stars in the entire organization, at least from my point of view. They're great for teaching undergraduates. That's one of the things I've used them for here, is to at BYU to try to get our undergraduates a chance to do research, something to get hands-on, which is kind of the nature of the AAVSO as well. And I've enjoyed that opportunity to work with the other section leaders, and moving to the board would just be a kind of a next step up in helping the organization grow and develop. And so that's my introduction.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Okay, I'd like to go to Diogo next, if that's all right with you.
Okay, thank you, Joyce, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Joyce and Brian for giving me the opportunity to run for the board. My background is that I was early very interested in science. I attended MIT as an undergraduate. However, I changed and I had a career in the banking industry, helping them adjust to the changes in information technology. When I retired, I began consulting through Harvard Business School, of which I am an alumni, and I've done this for about 15 years. And then 3 years ago, AAVSO did a project where I was a team member. And if you remember it, it was a strategic plan. And we became very concerned about the financial situation at AAVSO. And two good recommendations were involved selling the property and also being very aware of the need to not spend down the endowment. AAVSO is remarkably lucky to have the endowment it does. Just for example, well, let me go on. I'll tell you why I'm running for the board. AAVSO has two issues. One is strategic, which is how will it find a role in the future of astronomy with the trend toward robots, big data. Brian and I have had a couple discussions about that. I mean, he understands this far better than I do. But I think it's a real issue, and I would like to help out any way I can, given that I am not an astronomer. Secondly, fundraising. It's very clear that, and this goes back to the CAP project, that for too long, CAP has not done as, not CAP, AAVSO has not done as good a job as it could. Its fundraising is almost strictly internal. It's to people who know it, people who have been a member, people who actively participate in the activities, but not outside. If you look at universities, other science-oriented nonprofits, they have major efforts to seek money from the populace at large, from people who support science, but are not scientists, people who can afford to give, but maybe don't even know you. It's just they support kind of what you're at. To do this, there's a couple of things that I think the board can do, and I want to help the board do that. One is start another high-level group, call it with different labels you might, that is targeted exclusively at the outside, at marketing beyond what I call the inner circle. If you look, for example, at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, a world-class scientific nonprofit, aside from the funding they get from the government, they raise a lot of money from private individuals, and their entire board, well, they have two groups. They have a board with a lot of people, and then they have a second group under some other label. None of them are people who work there. They're all people who are influential, who support the organization, but their main job is fundraising. And I'm sure you know that that's what goes on at every university. So, and I think to do this, again, I'll finish up. I think AAVSO could do a much better job in the marketing and PR area with appealing beyond the people who are the members and the observers. And I certainly want to help out on that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Diogo. So I'd like to call on Mark next.
All right, thank you, Joyce. My name's Mark Munkacsy. I've been an AAVSO observer for some 27 years. my career started out with me as an officer in the submarine force of all places, where I came face to face with the importance of integrating technology with the people who are using that technology. There can be a complex interaction there, and it's important that we understand that technology gets used by people, and those people have culture, and that interaction matters when we want to either change processes that are being used or introduce new technology to that group. I also spent about 35 years working for one of the large defense contractors as a system architect and also as director of research and development there, where again, a lot of the strategy that I was putting together looked at both the connections between technology and the people using that technology, as well as how do you fund that technology development, and how do you fairly allocate that funding in the face of competing demands for research and development dollars. I retired about 5 years ago, and since then have done most of my retirement time doing astronomy-related things within the community. I've always got some high school students that I'm working projects with. I'm also involved with University of Massachusetts in Dartmouth as they renovate their observatory, and I just work general public outreach. Within the AAVSO, a long time ago, I was a member of what was then called the Comparison Database Team, CompDB team, as AAVSO was going through the transition from hand-drawn paper charts to today's variable star plotter. I learned a lot through that experience, which was kind of a lesson to me that there are learning opportunities within the astronomy community and specifically within AAVSO that may not actually be labeled as training or learning opportunities. I was also involved in the recent rewrite of the AAVSO's guide to CCD and CMOS photometry. That was kind of fun. One of the things I learned there is that we ended up spending as much time trying to get the technology correct in that guide as we spent trying to reconcile all of the opinions and perspectives of that wonderful team of experienced photometrists that were working together on the rewrite of that guide. And then most recently, this past year, I was part of the AAVSO's Data Quality Task Force, along with another co-candidate here you'll hear from in a minute, Matt Craig. That team looked at the quality of the AAVSO's International Database of Variable Star Observations and asked a bunch of questions like, what's the perception of the AAVSO data quality in the eyes of researchers? Is our data good enough for today? Is it good enough for tomorrow? How should we be measuring data quality? Is the data quality getting better or is it getting worse? And what can we do as a community of observers in order to improve that data quality? I'm running for the board first as a way to give back to the AAVSO. I've gotten so much from it. My experience with integrating people and technology and funding the people and technology integration, that's a great fit for where the AAVSO is today. The AAVSO, as has already been mentioned more than once, is in another period of transition. As large-scale surveys are now providing a huge volume of data that's potentially available for integration. And further, we've got looming on the horizon the opportunity for an increased role for machine learning, artificial intelligence techniques, which have their own unique integration challenges and which can't just be brought in blindly without thinking about the culture of the AAVSO community and how we preserve and protect and balance that culture and where the culture is evolving with the technology and where the technology is taking it. So helping to build those strategic roadmaps to guide the AAVSO through all these opportunities is a pretty good match for me and my experience.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. And then we'll go on next to Walt.
Okay, off mute. Thanks,
Okay,
Joyce.
I can hear you. Okay.
Okay, well, so I'm Walt Cooney, and I am from Titusville, Florida, raised across the river from Kennedy Space Center, where my dad was a NASA engineer. And I went to college, got a bachelor's and then a master's in chemical engineering, and served as a career engineer, mostly as a team lead for engineers working on design of new chemical plants and expansions. And some of those projects were as high as $1 billion and $2 billion. And then I finished my career as the department manager for about 75 design and automation engineers at our central office here in Houston. And now that I'm retired, I get to go back and do what was always really my first love. I got interested in astronomy in 4th grade. I did a book report for school on the constellation that I thought was called Orion. And sometime later found out, of course, that that's Orion. And that really just got me excited about astronomy. You know, since then it's a hobby that's gone horribly awry. And I was a visual astronomer primarily for the largest part of my life, always out with the telescope, that kind of thing, going to star parties. In 1998, I worked, well, the late 90s generally, I worked with, when we lived in Baton Rouge, I worked with LSU, the Baton Rouge Park Association, and the Baton Rouge Astronomical Society membership to build the Highland Road Park Observatory, which is a community opportunity. We have a 20-inch Ritchie there and a 16-inch Ritchie, both in domes. And we have weekend programs and summer camps for students. And it has turned into a pretty amazing thing. And the other thing that came out of that was access for me to use that 20-inch Ritchie. And so I got started doing something more than the visual side of astronomy. My love was always for the science, honestly. And so started with CCD work. And since then, discovered about 60 asteroids, about 50 variable stars, and I've authored or co-authored about 50 papers in the literature. So have definitely found a way to keep busy. I guess a couple of other things I've done with AAVSO. I've been around the AAVSO for 20 something years now. Back in 2004 and 5, I worked with Dirk Terrell, John Gross, and Arnie Hendon to create the Sonoita Research Observatory, which was the very first AAVSO net system. It was what got it all started. And then since then, I've also worked with another group, a telescope here in the Texas Hill Country. The Madrona Peak Observatory is now part of the AAVSO net. Over the years, I've been an active contributor for the Center for Backyard Astrophysics, and I'm currently co-lead of the AAVSO CV section along with Sean Tvorek. So I've been busy, retired now, coming up on 5 years, and truly loving the chance to get full-time back into astronomy. As far as the AAVSO and priorities and what I see opportunities of, there are a lot of opportunities. I would say generally some of the most important parts of every organization that's often not given enough effort and attention is just communication. You know, as with my experience as an engineer for years and years, we we were always really good at engineering. We fell down in the fact that we didn't communicate well with each other, and there were assumptions and things were dropped. And so I think part of a very well-functioning organization is a lot of effort at communication. I think we're doing a lot of that. I think we can always do more of it. As part of that too, I'd like to drive membership. We're about 1,200 people, as I understand it. I think we can grow a lot. And my time's almost up, so I won't keep going. Maybe I'll have a chance to talk some more about it in the next bit. So anyhow, thanks.
Thank you.
Joyce?
Yeah, thank you. That's great. We will get a chance to go into some of these in more detail in the next two questions. Okay, so last but not least on this round is Matt. So go ahead, Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Craig. I'm very proud that I remembered to unmute myself before talking. I realized I really wanted to do astronomy when I was in middle school, and I got an astronomy book and saw the pictures, and spent a year talking to my parents into getting me a telescope. It was a very inexpensive telescope, which, as you all know, is hard to use. And when I finally saw something through the eyepiece in 7th or 8th grade, I was so disappointed that I didn't come back to observational astronomy for about 20 years. Essentially, I waited until I could use a computer-controlled telescope, the one that our university owns, to come back to observational astronomy. In between, I briefly studied particle physics, and then did my PhD work on simulations of galaxy formation. I've spent 25 years, my 25th year at Minnesota State University Moorhead. It's a small university in Western Minnesota. And for the past 13 years or so, I've been doing observational astronomy projects with students. I have kind of a weird research program. If the students are interested in it and it changes in a short enough time scale that we can measure it reasonably, then I'm game for that. Let's go observe it. About 10 years ago, I went on sabbatical and got involved with the AstroPy project, helped write their CCD data reduction package, and have remained involved in the project since then. I'm running for the board for a couple of reasons. One is that, like others have mentioned, I want to give back. So at this point, I use the CCD CMOS guide as one of the primary texts in the observational astronomy course that I teach. That's got a mix of majors and non-majors in it. I've learned a ton by being involved in the AAVSO, and I want to try to give back to the organization. The couple of other things I think I would bring to the position is my experience with software. So I look at the AAVSO and I see an organization that has tremendously wonderful volunteers, right? Many of the important pieces of software that the AAVSO relies on are maintained and or were written originally by volunteers, and would like to see we'll talk more later when we get the question about what I'm passionate about, but think that there's a lot of potential for the software to go in new directions. I spend my days teaching. So the position I'm in, I'm teaching 12 credits a semester. We opened up our observational astronomy course to non-majors about 3 or 4 years ago. And since then, I've been focused on how do you get people who have signed up in a course because they have to take a science lab course, actually interested and engaged with the material. And I think those skills are something that would transfer over to helping the organization develop its materials. I had the honor of serving as a president of our faculty during COVID. So my term started in, when was it? August 2019. And so 6 months later, I remember before spring break, we were all like, this won't affect us. By the end of spring break, we were shut down and would remain off campus almost entirely for about 6 or 9 months. During that time, there were extensive layoffs announced of faculty announced at the university. And while I don't think the AAVSO has that sort of future, I bring it up because the AAVSO does most of its work remotely. We'll be discussing things that people are very passionate about. And one of the strengths I think I would bring to the board is that I tend to focus on listening to what people have to say and trying to help people come to some agreement about a way forward. I had the honor of being the chair of the Data Quality Task Force, and I saw my only useful role in there was to pay attention to who people were paying attention to and run with that. And so with that, I'll wrap up.
Thank you. Those were all very impressive opening candidate statements. It's going to be a hard choice in this election, I think. I wish we could have more than 3 as the final selection. Okay, so I have 2 questions. If that's okay, Brian, I'll go into the next question phase. And these have some overlap, I know, with your opening statement. So hopefully they can be a little bit shorter answers. I've budgeted about 2 minutes per candidate per question. So we'll see if we can stick to that. So the first one is, as Matt alluded to, what are you passionate about in regard to the AAVSO and its mission? And what specifically would you like to advocate while you are a board member? And I'm going to try to, as I say, randomize this. So let's see, I guess I'll start with Mark this time. Is that okay?
Sure, that's fine.
Great, go.
So there are several things I'm passionate about. One of them is that technology is always connected to people. And in order to be effective in bringing technology into a community, there has to be a recognition of what that community is and where that community's values lie. And when we talk about the evolution or transition of AAVSO from what it was yesterday to what it is today to what it will be tomorrow, we have to recognize that the culture of the community is also going to change and adjust as we go through that, and that we as membership and we as potential members of the board need to keep those 2 elements in balance with each other, recognizing that one of the greatest assets we've got within AAVSO is the membership. And the other thing that matters to me is keeping the AAVSO relevant in tomorrow's world with all the changes that are coming about with robotic observing. It means the focus within the AAVSO is going to be less on what happens at the eyepiece or what happens with the camera, and more into how AAVSO fits into the larger astronomical community. And that implies some additional skills coming to the table.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'd like to call on Eric next. What are you passionate about, Eric?
Oh, I'm always passionate about my variable stars. That's something I've been doing for so long. And bringing that to a larger audience and allowing them into the science is exciting. Some of the stuff I'm trying to stretch out, but I know there's a lot of robotic things going on, and it might seem like we're going to get rid of opportunities, but there's still an awful lot of need for follow-up and just having the sufficient amount of it. And that's something the AAVSO can definitely provide. And then stretching and giving the membership some opportunities to see the other areas of astronomy, where right now we're very much in the optical range, but the opportunity to maybe bring in some of the other areas, especially, I mean, right now, a lot of my work is with a 3.5 meter with infrared spectroscopy, and making that kind of information available to the broader membership that have never thought about non-optical astronomy and what's all buried in there. And so that being able to stretch out there and give people more information, and even into the stellar modeling side that we don't, the AAVSO is much more obviously the O for observer. The observing side is there, but also now there's a lot of opportunity with simple models to get the membership much broader exposure to the science.
Okay. Very good. All right, thank you. So I'd like to, let me see who I'm going to try calling on next. How about you, Diogo?
Hi, thank you, Joyce. Well, I'd like to mention two things. I'm passionate about marketing, websites, social media, use of technology to communicate, and I've had ample opportunity to look at what AAVSO has been doing over the last 3 years, and I would love to be involved with changing it, making it better. There's a tremendous opportunity there to improve. I'm also, I love reading about astronomy. When I was a kid, I did have a telescope, but I lived in a big city and it just, things didn't work out. And I'm passionate about learning more about exoplanets, for instance. And I think, I know you guys are all thinking about that and working on it, but I think I'd like to see AAVSO think about its mission and its core as more than just variable stars. I am the one who suggested a couple of years ago about the name change. And I think there were some, some jaws dropped. But you guys do a lot more. And I think it could be improved a lot in terms of outreach and communication. And that's what I would like to do.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so Walt, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. A lot of possible things to talk about what we're passionate about. Personally, I love the work, and I love the chance that regular people like us get the chance to do this really tremendous work. The thing I'd really like to mention is there has been a lot of concern about what's going to happen with surveys, et cetera, et cetera. And I think something that's really important for us is, in fact, we're headed for another golden time, really, in two ways. I think we need to be sure that the visual folks still realize that what they're doing really does matter. Some of you have heard the story from Brian about going out to the AAS conference, talking to the solar astronomers about, do we really need to keep doing visual sunspot counts? And they said, oh yes, please, because that's been going on for years and years and years. And it's that long baseline that the here today, gone tomorrow surveys can never fulfill. I think that's very much still the same with our visual work on variable stars. And with the CCD CMOS stuff, there's just no question to me that the surveys are going to be a spectacular opportunity for us to jump in and figure out the stuff that they don't have time to work on. There'll be a fire hose of data coming, and we can help sort that out. It'll be a chance for amateurs to be part of the working with the professionals and publish papers. And I would really hope that we can make that very well known, very clear to our membership that this is really a really terrific opportunity that we've got now. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And I think I still have Matt left. It's last again. I messed up my randomizing. Oh, well, please go ahead, Matt.
Sure. So I've been told I turn every problem that I encounter into a Python programming language problem. And there's some truth to that. I rewrote the VSP software over the last couple of years from Perl into Python. And as a result, became more familiar with the technology stack that AAVSO software is built on. And right now it's split across several languages. You have a few different people working on similar things, but in different places in a way that they don't reinforce each other. And I think that with some guidance and some training, the organization can make some more progress in using those volunteers that are already doing things with the organization to be going more in the same direction and to get more done. I'm also interested in data quality, and I'll be honest, I was served on the task force and interested in this position and in working on data quality more, so I can learn more about it. I was very upfront when I started on the task force that I was not an expert in data quality, but I hope to be closer to one by the end of it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll move to our second prepared question, and I know there's a lot of overlap with things you've already said, so hopefully it won't be too much. The second question is, what current challenges do you see that the AAVSO faces, and how might we work together to address those challenges? Okay, so I'd like to start this time with Diogo.
Thank you, Joyce. One thing that is, I think, an opportunity is to get the board to be moved, not precipitously, but slowly, by perhaps studying some of the academic research, other types of sources that talk about what are the key quality attributes of good boards. AAVSO deserves a good board. And I can share a lot of this stuff. It's important that board members be not only committed, of course, and knowledgeable, but they are ambassadors to the rest of the world. They assist and participate in fundraising. It's a well-known fact that some outside donor to the AAVSO will expect everyone on the board to be a donor as well. Maybe not as much as they are, but a donor. It's incredibly important. And there's a whole list of things that we can't go into here, but I would certainly hope to advocate for the board doing maybe a bit of a self-assessment and then trying to move in some of these directions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So Matt, would you like to go second this time?
Oh, I don't know if I have enough time to prepare. So there's, I think, a couple of challenges. One is the difficulty of getting started. But it's maybe not, I think getting started with visual observing, there are great materials the AAVSO provides for that. But if you want to do CCD observing, there's just a huge barrier to entry because of the cost of materials. And I would expect most people who have a camera initially are going to have a DSLR. And that ties into another thing that I see as a challenge. The AAVSO's materials right now talk about what you would do ideally when you're doing photometry and you do color transforms, and they have detailed instructions about how to do that. What I don't think we do a good job as could be done is talking about, given the data you have, what's the best you can do with it? What's the most you can get out of that data? So as an example of that, folks who are observing exoplanets are going to do it in a single filter. And one of the questions we ought to be asking is, given that data that you've collected, what can we conclude, or what can we conclude about colors, and what can we do about transforms, given that it's single filter data, but that we have fairly extensive catalogs now of colors of these stars.
Very interesting. No problem. Okay, so Walt, why don't you go next?
Well, I'll echo what everyone else is saying too about fundraising. As I mentioned, I think we've got just a massive opportunity to contribute and to get more people involved in our organization and have that opportunity. And of course, money is what is the enabler, one of the enablers for that to happen. And so, yeah, as has been said, reaching out outside our organization. And currently I'm working with the local high school on capital campaign, so I've had some experience with that. And I think we have to work pretty hard to expand that.
Okay, Eric?
Okay. I think the one thing I just got earlier today, I had to sit in on the American Astronomical Society's chair meeting and having a discussion with other chairs from around the country at all different schools was the sheer number of astronomy majors that have come into existence at the universities. Schools talking about quadrupling their number of majors, schools having 400 majors. We have 100 majors here. There is an enormous amount of interest in astronomy, and not all those. So, you know, over 4 schools, there was 1,000 majors from just 4 schools. There's so many young people out there that are interested in astronomy. They are the untapped resource that the AAVSO could tap into. We need to move younger and bring the membership in, not when they've retired, but bring them in while they're undergraduates, bring them in early, have them be members for their entire lives. And that's the one I've been thinking about for the society for a long time. To grow it is to grow it young.
Thank you. I think I didn't ask Mark yet, right? Mark, go ahead.
Not yet. So one of the interesting challenges we have is what I would call the new member experience. As I was working on both the photometry guide and also the data quality task force, I was surprised at the number of diverging messages I got from members of those groups talking about why we couldn't do X because people will be affected by it, they will react negatively to it, or they're already negatively aligned to such and such an idea within the AAVSO. And it left me kind of scratching my head as to why AAVSO leadership today is not all on the same page in understanding what new members are scared of and what new members are looking for in the way of help, and what new members are not looking for in the way of help, and how proposed new feedback that we might be providing to observers through data quality initiatives, how that's going to affect their experience as new observers. And to the extent that we are a community of observers, we need to understand what they're going through, what they need, what they want, what they don't want, and get things balanced between what they're looking for and what we think they're looking for.
Okay, thank you. Well, very, very good suggestions for things the organization could improve and challenges we face. Right. So I think our next stage is to take questions from the attendees at this webinar. So if you have a question for any one of the candidates or for all of them, and you would like to type it into the chat, Brian and I will take turns choosing among those questions and posing them to the candidates.
So Joyce, since you've been talking for a while, I'll give you a little bit of a break, I suppose, and I'll take one of Richard put a couple questions up here. And so the first question I'd like to ask here is he says the organization is getting old, and he asked the question, how would you bring in new young members? And I will state that this has been a problem that I went back and looked at the meeting minutes, and it's been a problem almost as old as the AAVSO itself. And so, you know, it is definitely something that needs to be discussed and addressed. However, it's also is something that we also have to acknowledge as a persistent characteristic of our organization. So would anybody like to take that question to start with?
Well, I'll just mention, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Diogo.
Well, I mean, we discussed this in the CAP project extensively and with the board at the time. I mean, it's a real challenge, but the one thing that occurs to me is that well, two things. I mean, this growth of student interest is great, But what's bringing them in? I remember Gordon talking about how there was a lot of interest back in the time of the Apollo thing, and a lot of people started getting into astronomy then. Maybe today it's James Webb or the growth of exoplanets, the realization that we are probably not alone in the universe. You can look at the relative success of the SETI organization. I think it would get a lot more young people if there was something like Zooniverse, something that allows them to participate without having to go out and sit at a telescope in dark skies, which are increasingly hard to find. And the technology is increasingly available, so they can look at data. They can participate in many, many ways. And I think AAVSO needs to spend more time on that.
Yeah. Thanks, Diogo. And Matt, I think I saw you raise your hand there.
Yes, I've been bringing undergraduates to the AAVSO meetings for about 5 years now. And one of the strengths of the organization, I think, is how welcoming it has been to them. So the first time I came to a meeting, one of the students was terrified because she was talking about something that somebody at the meeting, had written a paper, and she was referring to that, and they had a very pleasant interaction, and it was really positive. But along the lines of what Diogo was saying, once they move on in life, they don't have the money yet to go buy their own equipment, and there's not an obvious way for them to help and participate. And so finding ways that we, along the lines of Zooniverse or something, where we have something structured for people to stay involved and feel like they're doing something important and useful would be great.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Would any of the other candidates like to take a crack at this? Just raise your hand or kind of give me a heads up nod or something like that.
I think I already
Eric?
mentioned it,
Yeah.
just that they're out there. And actually the research has said that a lot of it's coming because of just the general STEM push, that's become so much of the culture to try to have people go into the STEM fields. And astronomy just has the natural draw that really no other field has. So I don't know if it's any particular piece of science that's drawn people in, but I think we're seeing people becoming more interested in the STEM fields. And so, yeah, any kind of program, I think there's something I talked with Stella about previously was at high school competitions, trying to go have the membership provide data for high school groups and have them do all the analysis and things and kind of judge it, not against another, but judge it how well they did. And so trying to get them, the people have also said, get them hands-on opportunities.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Mark, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I want to extend what Matt said a few moments ago. The working with Sebastian, with the stuff he's got in VSX, he does a masterful job of showing how you can use external data to augment what's already in the AAVSO database. You don't need a telescope. You don't even need any visual acuity in order to do that. It's a great way for people to get involved with variable stars without having to make a money investment, without having to spend time at night outside. And I don't think we've taken that as far as we could as a form of ambassadorship to the larger community. So I think there's opportunities that are just waiting for us to grab hold of them and push them in the right direction.
All right, thanks, Mark. And Walt.
Yeah, I guess really the thing I want to start with, though, is echo what you had said at the very start, Brian, is this will be a question that we face for the eternity of the AAVSO and other organizations, is that when people are younger, they have a million opportunities and a million things going on. And in many examples of people who are AAVSO members, they were very excited, young amateur astronomers who just had to let that go to the wayside as they had a career and a family, and et cetera, and then eventually got the chance to participate in what they really loved. And so I very much agree with that. I think a big opportunity to catch those people early for us still is the club meetings around the country and around the world. And right now, the organization is doing an awful lot to be sure that we're getting ambassadors out, giving presentations to these clubs. I think the membership grows as we see new members in new places. Here in the Houston Astronomical Society, I've been part of it doing variable star work for a while, and it's been a slow process, but what I have found is people start asking more and more, and I tell them and we talk about it, and they ask more and more, and then over a few years they start thinking, well, gosh, I really can do that stuff. And now we've got quite a few more people happily doing this work and joining the group. And so that's a big fertile ground for us to find folks, and the seeds just take a long time to mature sometimes.
Yeah, thanks, Walt. So Joyce, I'll let you take the next question.
Okay, thank you. We could use more questions, so please put your questions into the Q&A section. We have another question from Richard, and it is, what do you see as the use of the AAVSO net for the membership and for outreach? And if one of you could give a small description of what AAVSO net is for the audience, that would be great as well.
Hey, shall I do that?
Absolutely,
I've been quite
that's
involved
great.
with
Thank
it.
you. Okay.
Yeah. So the AAVSO net is a group of telescopes located around the world. Most of them are modest aperture, about 7-inch reflector Takahashi scopes, and these are our bright star monitors, quote unquote. And then there are also several larger aperture 20, 24-inch telescopes also scattered around the world. And they're an opportunity for our membership to submit proposals, and proposals is a very strong word for what we actually do. We ask for people's ideas, what they'd like to look at, and if it's a reasonable thing, then they get the chance to get data from telescopes anywhere and everywhere. And it's an imperfect system. It's a very difficult thing to run that kind of system. We've got some amazing volunteers who put in tremendous amount of work, and that's pretty awesome, honestly. And I would say that it continues to grow. There are more systems. The number of proposals coming in keeps increasing. And the big reason for that is because there's been just a lot more publicity about it. It seemed a lot more reachable for people. And so it's growing a lot. Richard asked specifically about membership and outreach. It is a great opportunity for membership, and a lot of people are starting to use it now and have been more so for the last couple of years. Outreach, it's not really built for that, at least in terms of, here's a telescope and we'll show you what we're looking at right now. But it could be used as an opportunity to talk to 5th graders in Kalamazoo about let's run your project on the AAVSO net scopes. And yeah, I do think that would be an opportunity we really haven't looked at much.
Anyone else have any thoughts on how we could use AAVSO net for membership benefit, which I think it is clearly, and outreach? Walt has said it all. Okay. Okay, so I don't see any other questions here. but I guess I have a question. So I haven't actually submitted any observations to the AAVSO. And I've done observing as a professional astronomer more at the beginning of my career when we actually had to show up at the telescope and take data, and they needed people to staff the days where we needed to observe. So I observed on Thanksgiving and Christmas and days when they couldn't find someone else to do it. But it was a great privilege for me. Anyway, what would you do with to attract members that don't want to be observers, but want to volunteer or in some other way contribute to the AAVSO? How would you engage volunteers like that or make use of them? What kinds of things do you see them doing in the AAVSO, even if they don't want to observe? Yeah.
I think the key is making what the AAVSO does understandable to a layman who doesn't have technical knowledge, and showing why this is supporting science. What exactly is the benefit of amateur, you forgive me for using that word, observations? And I think that much more could be done in that area. It is when I look at the website and what I've heard in the 3 years being connected with AAVSO, it is you could do a far better job of communicating and talking about it.
Okay.
Joyce, I'll go back to what I said earlier about the new member experience. We should be all over new members with advice and suggestions and this very rich set of here are all the different ways that you could contribute, and then find ways as they gain expertise to add to that list and show them, okay, here are some more advanced ways that you can contribute to our mission, whether it's being outside and observing or whether it's sitting in front of a keyboard and a monitor and doing data mining. We don't do enough outreach to the members to explain to them what opportunities do exist, but there's plenty of opportunity.
Yeah, I think I don't know, this personally, I think having a list of things like that we can offer to the members, new members, on how they could get involved, even if they're not observing, would be a good thing. So, okay. Anyone else have ideas along those lines?
Yeah, I think I just successfully raised my hand.
Okay.
The data mining is an incredible opportunity. You know, I'd love to dig into that myself, but I'm too busy getting new data and having to deal with that, honestly. But it goes very well to the younger people who are incredibly computer literate and can jump on that stuff and do great things. And so really, I would say as part of our outreach, that's an opportunity to advertise that we've got this tremendous amount of material out there, and they can just dive in. And if we can give them the support that they need, they can be virtual astronomers in ways that none of us could have ever done before. And it brings them towards, hey, let's go use a real telescope out in the field next to. So anyhow, thanks.
Any other thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things. So one is, and I know this was done at some point in the past, there's a role to play with reviewing data quality to the extent that you can have a person go through and flag discrepant observations so that a researcher using the data down the road doesn't need to do that. Great. Working with a student on a project right now where we took some measurements of time of maximum of a variable star. We found lots of observations in the AAVSO database and have extracted from those measurements many more times of maximum. I'm guessing that there's a lot of observers who are kind of like me. I love taking data. I fall down a little bit at looking at the data. And so, my guess is that there are plenty of observations that have been submitted on which no, analysis has been done. I think at the beginning, it's going to be important to provide people with tools to do whatever it is we want them to do. And I see that, to turn this into a Python problem, right? I see that as another opportunity to get volunteers involved, right? If you clearly define what's that tool look like, and you can point people towards, this is how you would implement this sort of tool. It's another way to get folks involved who might not get involved otherwise.
Yeah, Matt is giving a workshop on Python, using Python before the annual meeting this year, and I signed up for that, and I'm looking forward to that because I am not as Python literate as these new students that are coming out right now. So that's a really useful resource. So just teaching courses like that would be another example of volunteering for the AAVSO, not just observing. Yeah. Okay, I don't have any other questions, but Brian, do you have some questions that?
Yeah, I can certainly, ask a couple here. I would encourage the members of the audience. So Barbara, Bob, Cleetson, Conan, John, and Richard, you've already asked a couple questions, but if you do have any questions, feel free to type them into either the chat or ideally into the Q&A box so that Joyce and I can pose them to the members. It's this meeting is for your benefit, and it gives you a good opportunity to ask them the hard questions that nobody wants to ask. And I can kind of how about I'll take that as a nice little jumping off point, right? So one of the things that I've encountered as the new executive director, actually, I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary here on September 16th. So it's still fresh in my mind, is that the AAVSO is kind of everything to everybody, and it depends somewhat upon when folks came into the organization in terms of what they do. But in this next year, I think we're going to have to make a lot of really hard choices about where we focus our programs, because right now the staff is supporting something like 26 different major programs. And Matt, in terms of like the tech stack, we have 75 separate applications that we have written and are supporting in terms of tech stack. And for a staff of 5, only 2 of which are doing any kind of software development, that's a really difficult things to attempt to support. And so we have had a programs committee in the past attempt to evaluate our programs and try to decide which things should be deactivated. And whenever we do that, it makes somebody mad, right? So my question to you guys is, when you approach this type of a problem where you have to effectively make really difficult decisions about taking things that people may have loved for a long period of time, how would you approach that such that you can explain to them that there's a reason why this is being deactivated and why a particular program is we have to walk away from a particular program? So what thoughts do you have in terms of messaging that type of developing that type of a message, or even on the input side, like how you down select programs that would be selected for elimination?
Well, Brian, if I could jump in, I think you said exactly what you say. That's you're straightforward, honest about it, discuss the situation, and that's what people look for. You're right. There's always someone who's going to be upset about something, and I can certainly see that our software world has grown somewhat uncontrolled for years now, and has to be reined in just from a support standpoint. And I think there's some reasonably low-hanging fruit out there too, that there aren't that many folks who actually use, that we could step away from. And yeah, as far as you yourself just being straight up about what's going on, people accept that and appreciate the honesty, of course.
Yeah. Anybody else have any? Oh, sorry, Walt.
No, I was going to say, as far as input, I'm sure there's a tremendous amount of input on which programs people don't like or don't use. and there'd be no shortage of input from people. The trick would be to sort through that to get to real data.
Eric.
Yeah, this is something we're actually going through from a department perspective, is trying to imagine what does the department look like 5 years out, 10 years out. Trying to, are we going to become more computational in our department? So we want more computational areas, or do we, and so we give up labs? The lab people don't like to hear that because that's their territory. And so we have, it's kind of looking to the future and looking where the astronomical community is going. We've already talked about the big surveys. We've talked, LSST coming. All that data is going to be out there. What is, taking a hard look at what the AAVSO's role is in all that, is what's going to drive whether that software needs to be supported, whether, and it's hard. I mean, we're going through a ton of different problems in the department, and trying to get to sit and listen to people's concerns, and then try to take all that data and make the hard decisions. I mean, that's it. There's no good way to do it, but there's a necessity to do it.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Matt, you're up next.
Yeah, I think one of the important things to start with is, have you made a decision and you're informing people of it, or are you trying to involve people in the decision? My tendency is to try to involve people in making these kinds of decisions, because I think I don't necessarily that you're going to get buy-in. The programs at my university that have closed, nobody said, yes, that was a great idea that you closed my program. But I think you can do better or worse jobs of bringing people along about what choices need to be made, asking questions about how you could potentially consolidate programs. But I think it's useful to have a time scale for making these sorts of decisions, provide a way for people to have some input, and celebrate what they've accomplished. If there's a program that's ending, it's presumably gathered a bunch of data along the way, and there's some room for celebrating those sorts of things, even when you're going to end the program.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And Diogo.
As I recall, you said 75 tech stack and 26 programs, something like that.
Yeah, there's 75 different applications, so like written in computer code, and then 26 major programs. Like the Observing Award program, for example, or the AID data collection, observing campaigns, those sorts of things.
Well, I mean, you could start top down. You could say to yourself, given our resources today, what's the right number of tech stack and programs? That would give you a target to work toward. And then I would try to come up with a usage data, if you can, for every one of them. It's probably too much to say how much each one costs, but I guess I agree with the other speakers that you're going to have to make decisions, and you can't run an organization by letting anybody who complains influence a decision, And I guess I completely agree with you. It sounds like way too many, frankly, for such a small group.
Yep, terrific. And Mark, you're up next.
Yeah, so two thoughts come to mind. One is that as this is explained, it's really important to put it in the broader context of where the AAVSO is going, because there's a risk that people will hear your words and will say, oh, the AAVSO is downsizing. This is step one, and eventually it will shrink away due to lack of interest. And you don't want people to walk away with that message. And then second, getting back to that idea of getting people involved in the decision is presenting an alternative, which is this has to shift to a volunteer basis if it's going to continue within the AAVSO. And so here's how anyone who wants to continue to see this work and is willing to put in the effort to do it themselves, here's how you can contribute in order to keep that alive. And along with the warning that if nobody's interested in contributing to keep it alive, then that just kind of confirms the idea that this helps us focus our mission elsewhere and grow in a different area rather than maintaining these legacy applications.
Yeah, that's a very good thing. Thanks, Mark. And then I have a second question here, Joyce, if you don't mind me monopolizing a little bit more
Please,
time.
I don't think we
yeah.
have any open questions right now, so go ahead.
Okay, terrific. Something that I didn't really appreciate until recently is that the AAVSO isn't the only game in town. It used to be that getting people involved in science took a fairly large amount of work, and there weren't really easy methods or easy platforms in order for you to build out a new science effort. But now there's a variety of existing platforms out there. So the Zooniverse is a great example for some data classification, data inspection kind of tasks. Another good example would be like Exoplanet Watch, where they've stood up a from the ground up data collection citizen science effort, and the AAVSO effectively is, we're engaged with them through being their repository for where they put their data, but it's something that we could have probably done ourselves. But my question here is that now we're in a world where it's not very difficult to stand up a citizen science program completely from the ground up. And therefore, the AAVSO is actually facing what I would call, within a business sense, competitors. And so I'm curious, like, how would you go about finding these competitors? If we don't know about them already, and I'm always discovering new ones, kind of like every day. And how would you kind of size them up? Like, what kind of things would you be looking at in order to determine if they are really a strong competitor to us, or if we should instead collaborate with them? And once you have this information, like, how would you bring it up to the board, and how do you think you would usher through some kind of change at a strategic level in order to ensure that we are appropriately responding to these newfound competitors?
Well,
It's a lot to unpack, I know. So go ahead, Diogo.
I think a competitive analysis is an excellent idea. We did a little bit of this in the CAP study, but it wasn't very good. And you have to define what you mean by competition. Are we competing for funding, or are we competing for, let's say, media attention? Are we competing for the interest of young people at the universities? We could have done a lot more. I mean, some of the obvious ones did show up. You just mentioned a couple. And I think what I would do is authorize, either a subcommittee or something to spend time on it, to get more data, to call them and write it up. And then that would be the first step before you then say to yourself, what are these guys doing that might be better than we are? Where are we better than them? And stuff like that. A competitive analysis is always and should be redone every 3 or 4 years. And it's since AAVSO is undoubtedly the oldest of any organization we're going to look at, it may mean that we're going to have to learn to do some new things. Absolutely.
I mean, old organizations can do new tricks.
Yeah, it is possible.
Right. Yeah. Anybody else like to talk about that one? Okay, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a little bit of trouble thinking about things like Zooniverse as competition, in the sense of you said something about, are we going to compete with them, or are we going to try to cooperate with them? I would think we'll try to cooperate with everybody. It certainly, it's a competition that they may be winning, in the sense that I'm sure you have more people that come across Zooniverse and start doing something because you can do it right away, than you do come across the AAVSO and start doing something because the visual observing takes some training and some practice and some skill. And there's all of the equipment challenges with doing other types of observing. And for the data sciencey sort of thing, you're sort of on your own for doing for finding the tools to use to get the data and analyze the data. So I agree that it's important to look at what other folks are doing and how they're doing it and how we could be doing better. But at the end of the day, there's, what is it, 8 billion people in the world, and 7 billion of them have cell phones. So there's plenty of people. We're not competing for people to potentially work on this stuff. There's plenty of people, but if other projects make it easier for us to get started than we do, then we're not going to grow like they are.
That's a good point. Thanks, Matt. Would anybody else care to take a crack at this?
Well, to I don't know, extend what Matt said, it forces us to ask the question, who is our target member and observer of the future? Is it John Q. Public, who has very little science background, but, oh yeah, I want to be a scientist? Or is it somebody who's got a STEM background and is looking for a stepping stone to a greater role in STEM? Those things push AAVSO in two very different directions. And we should decide in a very deliberate, conscious decision who we're after or what we're after as part of looking at who the competition is.
Okay. Walt or Eric, would you care to say anything? It's like Walt unmuted there.
Yeah, I would just say that I agree with the folks just talking about. I don't see that so much as competition. I see that as people playing in the same space, maybe some different attributes to that space, maybe easier to jump into, that kind of thing. But I, at some level, see us all pushing in the same direction together. And as people jump into something that may be easier that they could do on their phone when they're at the car dealership waiting on their car, then that's great. And maybe soon after, we're the next step. And so I think those are more complementary efforts than they are competitive efforts.
Yeah, terrific. And Eric?
Yeah, I can't really add to that. I think Mark and Walt hit it dead on with we basically, those are the ones we then look to recruit from, because the ones that are more interested to take the next step up and the next step up. So I think they nailed that perfectly.
Okay, terrific. So Joyce, if I'm not mistaken, we're kind of at the top of our time here. So
We're out of time. Yes.
Yep. All right, so I'll just do the couple of slides just to remind folks about voting. And I did notice that Bob Tracy here noted in the chat that selecting only 3 of these 5 well-qualified candidates is a very difficult task, and they may have to resort to their dartboard. So yeah, it's always good to have very qualified candidates. So first off, I'd like to just thank everybody for taking their time to come in and meet today. And in addition to the candidates here, which I've worked with many of you in the past, and I look forward to continuing to work with whichever ones of you are elected to the board. But we'll still keep in touch, and I'd encourage you to also keep engaged with the board and the AAVSO. And if you don't make it on the ballot this year, make sure you try to give it a shot next year. Sometimes it takes a couple tries. And then, of course, I'd also like to thank Joyce and the members of the nominating committee. They spent a lot of time putting together this very good list of candidates that we have here, and I truly appreciate what you did here, Joyce. So just to wrap up here, I'd just like to remind everybody that the AAVSO is an organization that is managed by the board, but the board is selected by the members, and so you guys really need to get out there and vote. So online voting through Big Pulse is already open. You should have already received an email from them, so double check your inbox. And also, if you don't see anything in your inbox, go ahead and check your spam folder. Ballots were sent on September 1st, and so you should already have it in your inbox. If you didn't receive one and you think that you should, go ahead and email aavso@aavso.org, and we'll investigate why one wasn't sent or resend a ballot if it needs to be. So if you don't want to vote online, you can also vote in person at the AVSO's annual meeting, which is going to be held in Somerville, Massachusetts this year on November 3 through 5. And the polls will close at 9 a.m. Eastern time on Sunday, November 5th. If you have any questions about the voting process, feel free to go ahead and send AVSO to avso.org an email, and it can either be routed to me or over to Joyce or over to one of the candidates, and we'll be sure to route it around. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you one more time to everybody who was participating in today's webinar, both the panelists as well as our folks that we had online as well as attendees. And so with that, I wish you all a great weekend, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.